The following is an Operation Podcast production.
There's an absolute stewardship everybody has to take over. Hey, what am I thinking? What am I entertaining? And there's some real work that sometimes is so required to actually get the brain to even be receptive to thinking differently.
Mindbend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mindbend Creative.
Ashleigh Di Lello, thank you for joining me on the Mindbend podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, bioemotional healing is what you do. It's what you've created.
Yes.
This is what bioemotional healing is in one slide. ACT, which I can't remember how well I did or didn't do with the ACTs. I'll try to get through this with flying colors.
No one please be drawn back into the ACT testing. That's certainly not what.
Standardized testing. Wow. ACT, awareness of the hardwired thoughts and emotions stored in the body. The body keeps the score. Awareness of the hardwired thoughts and emotions stored in the body. A. C. Connect to the body with breath and questions to interrupt preconditioned responses. C is for connect to the body with breath and questions to interrupt preconditioned responses. And then T of ACT, T for take control of thoughts and emotions to create a new neurochemical response. Take control of thoughts and emotions to create a new neurochemical response. So bioemotional healing, to me, through this slide, implies that a person can take a proactive, engaged effort to change or move their body in a direction that will promote and facilitate healing.
Yeah. And that act, right? So we'll say act too, so people's brains isn't feeling threat over that ACT test. That is part of the brain-body blueprint that is there that helps people start to have, action steps for that overwhelming sense of how do I actually change, right? How I think and feel every day and the behaviors I feel stuck in. And then the broader view of bioemotional healing, that's an in-depth 12-week process, is really to rewire your nervous system's operation.
And you believe that can be done in a container a certain amount of time. You've tested it yourself first and foremost, and then you've brought other people through as clients.
8 years, yes. Yeah. And the truth is, it definitely, of course, like anything, that process looks a little different on each individual, right? And I've had clients of the most severe trauma to most severe physical issues to the most severe mental issues with anxiety or depression. And it looks a little different. By 12 weeks, I've had clients feel 100% better, 90% better, 70% better. Most severe, I think the most severe in 12 weeks, I've had a client maybe 30% better. But the beautiful thing is that in that time frame, though, we are changing those default habitual responses in how the brain and body communicate and how they react to perceived threats. So then when you change that, it keeps operating differently, which means the changes keep happening, right? Because one of the reasons we get stuck is because the brain gets better at whatever it practices, right? So as we start to change that hardware, if you will, then as that keeps practicing, the changes keep happening. So my goal is not just to help clients for 12 weeks, it's to lay a foundation and equip them to know what to do moving forward, right? My goal is for them to not need me. I really want people to step into this empowerment of the functionalities of the brain and nervous system are the same for each of us. So yes, here is what I did to literally save my life, rewire PTSD around my body, rewire chronic pain, reclaim my health. Here are the steps, right? Because as different as we are, the functionalities are the same. And continue to practice. I want to equip you. And then those clients who maybe at 12 weeks are at 60%, 30%. They keep practicing, and I get a call 3 months later, 6 months later. I'm at 80% now, right? Because that's really what it's about, is just to really teach people how powerful they are to heal. So what I found is, even though I wish everybody could be at 100% in 12 weeks, we have switched their nervous system from those fear and defense networks being hyperactive, where they're in kind of survival or stress hormones all the time, to now being able to, in technical terms, the pro-social networks of the brain are open. They're now in a place where they can heal, they can rest, they can repair, they can find safety. And once you have turned down those internal alarm bells, now the brain is receptive to new input. Now we really can change it. Now it can actually integrate it. And so I wish everyone could be 100% at 12 weeks, but when they continue, they get there. And that's, I think, so empowering when most of us have had times where we feel so reliant on someone else to help us. I want to teach them how to do what I did and then not need me to continue it.
So when I first got connected with you about coming on the show, and with Mindbend being non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness, and a lot of the guests historically having come from the overall psychedelic world, and we talk a lot about different psychedelic medicine, psychedelic modalities. But not only that, systems for working with the brain, body, spirit connection to alleviate suffering, to increase wellness in a person's life and in the world in general. I was thinking, this to me sounds like an integration tool. And you can have the most powerful event or learning moment in your life, whether it's like a psychedelic trip ceremony or an incredibly traumatic moment or a life-changingly challenging childbirth or an accident, right? These shift your paradigm, right? And we talk about trauma as being something that takes a person out of the sense of having the ability to have any control whatsoever or agency in what's occurring to them. So bioemotional healing and the structures you've created and are helping to teach people, to me, it just had a lot of resonance with what I've learned about how people negotiate the psychedelic experience specifically. Had you ever thought about any of the comparisons between the work you're doing with neuroplasticity and the consideration of such, and consciousness in general, and hands-on practices? I'm just curious, have you come across anybody in your work or speaking or your research that was also from the psychedelic space?
I definitely, just because I'm in the neuroscience space, have definitely come across it, and people have asked me about, whether I use it or have integrated it. And again, it obviously has been a powerful tool. And the reason why it is, like, in simplistic terms, is it just puts your brain more in an edit mode. Like
the psychedelic experience,
right.
In the default mode network, silencing so that
edit
things
it. And so that's where, though, you've seen people have profound, experiences, but you've also had people had detrimental experiences based upon what that experience looks like and how it's edited, right? So there's both, right? It's amazing and not benign, depending on the person and who they're doing it with and so forth. And while I know, and I've had clients who have done those experiences, and I've had clients who've had positive, and I've had clients who find themselves in more panic now than before. That's why it's so important to know who you're doing it with, right? The state of the person. Like, not everybody should do it, right? But where I think the problem is, and this isn't anything where we now get attached to that something outside of ourselves is the answer, end all be all, is that when it comes to neuroplasticity, we cannot get away from the reality of that the brain changes through repetition and practice. So you can definitely have an experience that alters the brain. right? And definitely the brain
prepares the brain for alteration.
That's right,
Yeah.
right? So if someone can have, obviously a traumatic experience can do that in a negative way, where the brain gets altered now and those fear networks get hypervigilant and overprotective. Or if you do have a lot of walls, you could have an experience where now you are more open and receptive to a different truth, right? Different meanings, different possibility. But then that's where the work comes in, the implementation, because to truly change the brain long term is through new experiences, new input, new practice, new habits, new thoughts, right? The emotional state you live in every day, the level of your consciousness, the actions that you're taking, because all of those are continuing to either keep the brain in the patterns it knows. Even if you have this opening experience, if you then don't utilize that to go, now I have to actually start the tough work of redirecting my brain to being different, thinking different, feeling different, acting different, then we can become almost dependent to keep going back to have this experience versus, hey, this opens the door and now let me utilize practices and implementation to really create new neural pathways that with time and practice become my default.
And you decided that for yourself in your own journey that you needed to change the signal, you needed to change the practice, you needed to change your thinking in order to change your health.
Well, yeah, and in part, it's because of what I went through in my life. You know, I was very sick. I fought for my life for 4 years when I was a teenager, and I wasn't given any chances of survival. So, and I was a fighter. I didn't accept that, even though literally every expert told me I wasn't going to live. But for
What age was this, Ashleigh?
13.
It's astonishing to have someone tell you
13.
that you're. I don't know how often that happens to young people in this country, but to hear that news, I mean, that's obviously paradigm shifting.
Oh, yeah. In one day to the next, I literally was healthy, and then I was fighting for my life with no warning, which is, again, extra traumatizing to the brain when there's no lead up, there's no prediction. It's like those moments where you think, how in the world am I here? This can't be my life, right? And you feel shock and overwhelm and every other human emotion, like simultaneously.
And your family too.
And my family too. And the uncertainty of it all. And I was such a fighter. No, I'm not going to accept this. And don't get me wrong, the journey was nonlinear and up and down and incredibly hard. But I lived between life and death for 4 years, which had a profound impact on my nervous system. Even though I was fighting to survive and I believed that I could and I would, I was also living in survival. So that altered my nervous system, right? It altered those fear and defense networks in the brain that are connected to fight or flight got lit up, and they were in daily practice for 4 years, because it was a literal physical survival, right? So I didn't understand what that did to my operation system, right? Because even once I survived, it's like, well, I want to go live life. But this is where this is applicable to anyone, is when you go through a prolonged physical, mental, or emotionally challenging experience, right? When it lasts through time, it's quite severe. You're giving your nervous system practice of sending and receiving stress signals, because that's what it's doing every day. And so with time, it inadvertently programs itself into this hypersensitive, overly protective setting. And that's where a lot of people say, like, oh, I just feel like I'm in fight or flight all the time, or I feel like I'm living in survival. Or even if I'm trying to have good thoughts, my brain is always wanting to go to the what ifs of the negative, right? And that's not just you. And yes, we have stewardship, but over the thoughts that we think, and certainly conditioning over time can create that in your nervous system. And it can be a byproduct of when you go through stuff that is incredibly challenging for a long time, and you have to survive. And those survival patterns then alter your nervous system to be more in that negative state from, hey, this is protective. This at least, I don't want to be taken off guard again. So let's predict the worst, because then at least you're prepared. And so there's an absolute stewardship everybody has to take over. Hey, what am I thinking? What am I entertaining? And there's some real work that sometimes is so required to actually get the brain to even be receptive to thinking differently. Because I've had those conversations in my brain, like trying to direct it to, okay, what's the best case scenario? But the brain has a data bank of memory. And in a nanosecond, I literally had like this back and forth where my brain's like, well, yeah, but remember when you were dying? Remember when this happened? Remember when this happened? See, I need to stay more in this network of let's prepare for the worst case scenario, because then at least you're not taken off guard again. And so I think some people, when we just talk about taking control of your thoughts, they can feel really defeated because they feel powerless to that. Because if they've been altered by an accumulation of life experiences, there's some more work to be done before the brain is receptive to change how it perceives you and your safety in the world.
Mm-hmm. Just understanding, thank you for that, just understanding why you're working with what you're working with now. Your adolescent life-changing diagnosis and then ensuing like medical effort, which ran for like 4 years before that informed your interest in learning about how to exist without pain, how to exist in a more optimal condition. Is that correct?
Yeah, that started the foundation of, again, this was 29 years ago. So the world was very different. And no one was talking about the brain then, like we are today. You know, there was no internet. But I just had this innate feeling that so much of my survival depended on my fortitude and belief, right?
Okay.
And I experienced that. So I had long nights actually where I was too afraid to go to sleep. I got so sick that, right, I was afraid to surrender that conscious control. And so I'd stay awake and will my body to keep fighting. So that was the introduction where I intricately experienced how powerful that brain-body connection is, right? And how what we think. And when I was going through treatments, I saw people on the opposite. I saw people who were very sick, but not dying. But every day they would speak, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. And they did, right? And so there's this is where I started to realize, man, what we speak and what we think and what we believe is in fact, and we have studies now that verify, I mean, it's more powerful than just about anything. We have studies that show it's even more powerful than genes, right? Our belief and expectation of what is possible changes the neurochemistry in our body. It changes whether we're healing and repairing or we're breaking our body down from the inside out. So I didn't have all the science then. I just had this literally from the will to live, right? I accessed just this desire and felt like I had a choice to die or not, meaning I was so sick that just like we've seen soldiers who lose the will to live can go in a corner and die because they lose the will to live, even when they're not physically ill. I was that ill, and I know if I could have just given up, that my body just very much could have not made it. But I've experienced how powerful the will to live is. So I didn't know all the neuroscience, but I knew and experienced, wow, our brain is so much more powerful. And it's not just intellect, right? Because then we just kind of equated the brain as intellect, but really our operating system and what's possible in this life is so dictated by what we believe. And that planted the seeds. And then I survived that, you know, and got back to life and living. And
you survived it through medical intervention, or at least monitoring to some extent, although they never really figured out at any point during this 4-year stretch from 13 to 17, they never really identified exactly what it was. Oh, viral infection.
Viral infection. They couldn't diagnose or treat.
And didn't go beyond that,
So they sent me home, and that's when my family back then, which is now more mainstream, we We didn't have any medical answers, so we did anything possible to support my immune system, right? So that was the food I ate, supplements, homeopathic medicine, which back then was very
Super
voodoo.
obscure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it literally just was, what can we do to support my immune system to do what it was designed to do, right? Which is to fight this virus and heal. So the combination of that with, yes, my sheer will to live and really communicating to my body every day that is healing. And it's so understood now, but I used to stand in front of the mirror. And when I say stand, I meant had to hold myself up by leaning over the counter because I was too weak to stand. And I would look at myself, which was very hard because I was yellow from my liver shutting down. I was 90 pounds. I looked gaunt. I had lost so much of my hair. My body was dying. So I avoided mirrors because I hated seeing that reflection. But I would look at myself and say, every day, my body is healing more.
And you had no other like immediate touchstones to like emulate yourself. There was no other author or public speaker or public persona that you were kind of like emulating in this process?
The only thing that helped me, like that existed, was, do you remember the Chicken Soup for the Soul books?
Yes, of course. Yes.
And I would read about amazing stories.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Because
Sure.
there was a lot of stories, but there was also some amazing stories of people defying the odds.
Okay.
And so I would be like, well, I can do the same. So I had that. And then for me, my faith was a really big part of just believing God is unlimited and therefore I must be too.
Okay.
You know? And so those two were really the aspects of what helped me. I had those reading other stories and not saying, well, they're the exception. It's like, well, if they can do it,
It's possible.
so can I.
And your family was there. You have both parents were in your life?
Yes.
And did you have siblings as well?
I did. I had an older brother and a younger sister.
So everybody was part of this journey with you.
Everyone was part
Yeah.
of the journey. Yeah.
So, and we have a limited time today, so I'm rocketing through a lot of
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
But like, so 13 to 17, and then 17, your life started getting better in terms of physical health and wellness?
Yes, I was no longer dying. It took 6 years total to be strong enough to like really go back to life.
Okay.
And
so from before high school till after high school.
yes. Yep. It wasn't really till my sophomore year in college. I even my freshman year, I still was struggling. I wasn't, again, dying anymore, but just still reclaiming full health. So 6 years to feel like, okay, I'm free. I can do whatever I want and go to school. I'm healthy. I'm strong.
And you attributed a lot of that to the work you did with your immune system, dietary, supplemental.
That with the brain, right? It's always a two-pronged approach, especially when you've got physical. You got to treat the body and you got to treat the brain.
So you were already well into that kind of the practices. You started developing them at that time that you're working with now.
Yes.
Okay.
But without really the neuroscience understanding,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
But if I just briefly touch on that, the brain is wired to validate beliefs. So I had a belief then that I was going to survive. I had a belief that I would dance again, which was like the love of my life. When I got sick, I'd been dancing 5 hours a day since I was 7. And while it was like torture to lose something I loved so much, it felt like my heart was ripping out from me. I also see it as one of the greatest gifts because I was so determined to do it again. And so without knowing, my brain sought to validate that belief, which meant every day my brain was looking for evidence. And I did something then that everybody talks about now, but no one told me to do. The brain seeks evidence to validate your beliefs. Well, I had no evidence in my reality, right, that I would actually survive. I was so sick. I continued to be sick for a long time. There was no evidence that I was healing, right? So when you can't find external evidence, that belief was so strong. My brain was like, I got to find intrinsic evidence. So I remember I had this thought one day, and remember, it wasn't today's world. I had this thought, well, if I'm ever going to dance again, and I can't now, I can't even imagine it. In fact, I'd been sick so long, I started to forget what it felt like to feel good. But I thought, well, then if I can't dance, I'm going to dance inside my mind. And so I started to visualize if you will, right? That's what we call it now. And I would do it while I was in tests and scans, and I would see myself healthy and dancing and strong, and I would see myself on the floor and moving, and it would be so real to me that I would cry, and not sadness. I wasn't visualizing from what I had lost. I was visualizing what I would once do again. And what I did not know then, what we do know now, is that in envisioning it and feeling it, I was creating heart-brain coherence, right? The neurons in the brain were aligning with the 40,000 neurons in the heart, which is the emotional aspect. And when that happens, we know the nervous system encodes that as something real. And I did that for nearly 6 years. And again, I say that because my belief was so strong that my brain then had to do what it does, find evidence. And if we can't find it, I'm going to create it. And that's how powerful beliefs are in dictating not just what we think, but what we do. So no matter, we always say like, we'll change behavior, but you have to look at your belief systems that are attached to your identity that are always underneath behaviors, right? Because ultimately that is the most powerful source that is going to dictate your brain every day in what you think and what you feel and what you do. So I didn't know this, but then 15 years later, when I'm really studying neuroscience, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what I was doing. That's what I was doing. And that's why I was able to come back after a 6-year absence and have an incredible dance career. I mean, 6 years, your whole adolescence, for any professional athlete, that's the most important time to develop your skills. And I didn't understand then, but it was because I was really creating those neural pathways for 6 years internally, that now there was just a physical execution of what I had already created. And I share that because anyone can do that. It's not just me. It's really harnessing that creative power in the brain. So I was doing things I didn't understand the neuroscience behind, but they were dictated by the beliefs and desires that I had. But I still didn't really understand it until I went through a second journey in my 30s at the height of my professional dance career. I had a 2-year-old and I had a failed hip surgery, and it launched my whole body into chronic pain. And it was like deja vu, but this time worse because I'm a mom, I'm a wife. I lost my career. I'm living in unrelenting hell. The pain just kept spreading. Got diagnosed with over 5 different chronic pain conditions. I'm sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night. I have nerve pain, which pretty much no medicine even touches. And it nearly broke me. It nearly broke me.
Let's not go fully into the 30-year-old hip journey and everything that entailed. We'll get there. Before we do, I would say that maybe one of the most high-profile instances of what you're talking about with someone who's been injured or is enduring physical limitations or pain and then willing themselves back is Joe Dispenza's journey and what he shared about his experience and willing. I guess, does that make sense to say willing back?
I think
or
so. I mean, because
creating
it's both, because in that willingness you're creating, right? So it's definitely simultaneous, because there's a deep belief, and then the willing is the action, right? Of I'm going to lay here and I'm going to create repair, and I'm going to see it and I'm going to communicate it. Yeah. Right? It's a very active process where I think sometimes people say they believe, but then there's no action on that belief.
It sounds like when people talk about psychic surgical procedures that they undergo through psychedelic experiences, where there's some master healing entity, spirit, working with the body and who understands it and is actually creating physiological change from the outside. Well, working with the person's inside, but there's some other person. In this case, you are the spirit, or that's you who's working as the healer for yourself in that visualization, in that repetition, in those moments of silent focus on your own. Did you go to school for neuroscience, undergraduate?
My undergraduate was not in neuroscience. I actually studied political science and history. I started pre-med, and then at that time I was still so attached to my illness. I felt like I would lose myself to trying to save patients, if that makes sense.
You couldn't prioritize somebody else's health journey.
I think I was still too traumatized from what I'd gone through. And I thought I didn't know at that time if I could actually have a life and not just be so devoted to my patients because it was so personal to me that I wouldn't be able to step away. So when I went through my second journey and I ran out of answers, I did everything treatment-wise that existed in all realms of medicine, Western functional, Eastern regenerative. And I knew I needed to study neuroscience because it first started that from pain. All pain comes from the brain, right? It's real in the body, but the brain is the one that creates it. It sends the signals, the severity of it. So I knew I needed to study the brain. That then made me realize, the nervous system and how life alters our nervous system. And oh my gosh, wow, my nervous system was altered from my illness in a way that I didn't understand. Those survival mechanisms have been on the on position. So that failed hip surgery happened. There was a physical catalyst, but the way in which my body responded was so violent, which was very much driven by the memory of nearly dying and what that had done to my nervous system and the threat response between my brain and my body. In understanding that, I looked at all the parameters, right, of going back to school and getting a neuroscience degree. And I'm a nerd at heart, but in full truth, and you have to think my life was on the line. I thought, man, I'm going to waste so much time studying things that are irrelevant to what I'm trying to understand because I just need to understand the pain science and the nervous system and how to rewire that. And so instead, I just devoted myself to reading all the books. I subscribed to neuroscience journals and I studied like 6-8 hours a day to really understand how the nervous system gets altered and how do we start to, which means those fear and defense networks in the brain get very hyperactive. How do we start to lower them? What are all the biopsychosocial approaches? Because that's what we now understand, right? It's not just physical and it's not just mental. The brain and nervous system take everything into account, present and past, the person, everything that's happened. How do we start to shift all that? And how do we turn down the pain receptors? And so while I was a nerd at heart, I just knew that I could find and figure out what I wanted to understand by the top pain scientists in Australia, and so reading his journals and his studies and his books. And I just devoted myself to, thankfully, this age of information and digested it with the whole purpose of merging everything that I had read with what I had experienced, both with fighting for my life and then living in debilitating pain, and creating a process, not one modality, not one practice, but a step-by-step progressive process to really not just regulate it, which is temporary but helpful, but to rewire it, to change it.
Yeah. I want to try to clarify the time between these major life eras. The first life era is the chronic pain, the near-death illness, state of constant illness in your adolescence.
Yes.
And contending with that, with what any healthy adolescent has to contend with already. That sets you up for a period of health and fun and engagement and pursuing the things you wanted to do, which was finishing your undergraduate and also dancing and going back into dancing. And then just paint for us a little portrait of that period between when you got clear of that first era of chronic pain and when you had the challenges that started to rise at age 30.
Yeah. So 13 to 17, nearly dying. About by 19, I was like, okay, I can do this. I still had some symptoms, but I was healthy and functional. The only thing I will say that was a common thread is even through my professional dance career, I had a lot of injuries, like a lot of career-ending injuries.
It was so hard on the body to begin with anyway,
hard.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. But it also didn't make sense, like, because I took such good care. I was like, why do I keep getting hurt? And I now understand. Part of that was my nervous system had never turned off that hypervigilance, right? Because... So
maybe you were a little too stiff on a landing or something, or too careful
protective,
on a...
right? Yeah. And I could feel kind of this internal buzzing all of the time. And I wasn't an anxious person. I was a perfectionist person, right? I was a very driven person to the place of, overly critical, very harsh, all or nothing. cried when I got my first A- in college, like that type of person that literally, and I understand my nervous system, the stakes were so high when I was sick that it really did feel like I must be perfect to survive this, right? Because no one's giving me a chance. So I was healthy and living life and my degree, and I was speaking, sharing my stories, and I had a professional dance career. I mean, on shows where I'm dancing, like, So You Think You Can Dance 10, 12 hours a day, went to Broadway 8 shows a week. Like, so of course it's very hard on the body, but I felt like I was in a constant battle to get through one injury to the next. But yet, life is good. And then I had my daughter at 31 years old, which was also another miracle. And she was traveling with my husband and I, who's my professional partner. So I really did, even though there was a lot of challenges with going through injuries to continually stay in my career, I mean, life was good.
It was total high functioning,
Yes.
getting stuff done, and the stuff you wanted to be
Yes.
doing. Was any of what came with bioemotional healing later percolating? Were you taking notes? Did you have any kind of idea that you would be forming
No.
a container for healing?
I had no idea. I mean,
Okay.
I was what you would say maybe a motivational speaker, right? Where I would
At
come
that
and
time, you were?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, share my story, because obviously when we were on So You Think You Can Dance, they highlighted my story, right? Because you get to know the contestants, and I mean, it was an incredible story to be there from your deathbed to now being able to dance 10,
Yeah.
12 hours a day,
Yeah.
right? But I didn't know the mechanisms of the brain. I knew it was powerful, right? But I had no idea until that second journey, which hit me at 33.
But you spoke about, like when you're being interviewed on the show, you spoke about what had worked for you as
Yes,
a kid, or at
yeah.
least, and if somebody asked you,
Yes.
you could elaborate on the process. I kind of believe that I willed myself,
Yeah.
or I helped heal myself through my thinking and through visualizing and that was fascinating. But that you didn't have any other like public figure touchstones that you related to on this?
No, I
Yeah.
didn't. I didn't dive into the neuroscience.
Yeah.
Really, it was just like, wow, this
Wow.
is powerful.
Yeah, you're
you
doing
know?
other things.
And then when the chronic pain journey started and I lost the ability to walk
Okay, we can get into that full
at 33,
on. Okay.
that's when that journey really led me to dive deep.
Okay, so you had your daughter at 31 and your career is still going
Yep.
with dance and you're a public figure, and then you injured yourself?
I had to have a second hip surgery. I'd already had one, and it was a long recovery, right? Learn how to walk again. But I had to do the other hip, and I thought it would go the same way, and it completely failed. And we later found out they left a hole in my hip capsule, but that wasn't visible in an MRI. It took 3 years to figure that out. But of course, threw off the entire structural integrity of my body, lost the ability to walk, lost my career. And for sure, that in of itself had big reasons to create pain, right? And dysfunction. But again, the way my body reacted was like next level. And it was crazy. It was violent. It was just like every week there was a new area in pain. And it was unbelievably, I felt so powerless, because at the same time I was like, okay, we can fix this. But the pain just kept spreading, and notwithstanding all my efforts to treat it and be positive.
When that started to happen to you, were you thinking, okay, now I'm back where I was at 13 to 18, and now I know kind of what to do to continue?
Yeah.
Did you immediately think
Yeah,
about that?
at first, obviously I had like, what the hell? I've already done this,
Yeah.
like, gosh, I've already done something that many people never go through, and now I'm here again. But at the same time, I was like, okay, I know what to do, right? And I'm positive we can fix this. And I did every treatment that existed, and when that didn't work, and here I am 2 years, 3 years down the road, and I'm just getting worse, like all the experts told me, right? Pain will spread, it's downhill from here. Then that's when I felt the most broken I've ever felt in my entire life, because I ran out of options. Like my husband and I, remember we had this day where we had this conversation, and I'm like, there's nothing left to try. I mean, we had done everything. Western, Eastern, alternative, holistic, regenerative, Chinese, Eastern.
For pain.
For pain. And nothing worked. And that's when I had my most desperate night I think I've ever experienced, which I didn't think anything could be harder than dying. But like I mentioned earlier, just living in that unrelenting torment, sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night. There's no moment of relief. There's not one area of your life it doesn't touch. It just broke me. And that was the closest I've ever felt to wanting to give up. And that night, I just didn't feel like I had anything left. I mean, my life was hell. I mean, I still was determined and driven, but like every day took all of me to get through. And then not sleeping and what that does to your brain and your life and the torture that is. But I had no choice. The pain was too severe. You know, I mean, I even had one night I was so desperate to get more than 3 hours of sleep. And I remember just rummaging through my pantry trying to find a leftover like Oxycontin from a surgery, you know? And I'm just like, I want to sleep. I want to sleep. And I remember I took it and I was sitting on my couch and the whole house was dark. And I was just sitting there like waiting for relief to come. 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, nothing. Like nerve pain is hardly touched by even the strongest narcotics. That's a really awful reality to live in. And it's scary when you think, oh my gosh, not even this can help me. And that's when, again, I just ran out of options and I almost gave up. Like literally just, okay, I give up. Like this is too hard. It's too hard for my family. And that night when I felt the most desperation and exhaustion, as I sat in that truth, because like in those moments, the brain tells you it's easier to give up, right? Because it's too hard. And hey, there's certainty in giving up. And as I sat in that and thought what that would mean for myself, my family, I started to feel that inner just resilience start to come alive again of no matter how broken I am, there has to be a way. There has to be. And I thought, well, if I can't find the answer, I'm going to create it. And that was the catalyst to deciding there had to be a way in the neuroscience to change my nervous system back out of pain. And that's what brought me to studying everything and realizing that even though pain brought me there, the way it manifests, the stress signals is so different for each of us, but the root is the brain and nervous system, right? And those internal alarm bells that have been essentially switched permanently to the on position. So they're sending those stress hormones. And for some people that really manifests in persistent anxiety and panic attacks. Other people, they go to total depression, right? And overwhelm. Others, it's addictions or OCD, gut issues, autoimmune, right? It looks different depending on the person, their life, their personality, their genetics, the vulnerabilities we all have. But the root and the driver is the nervous system. And that's when I realized, even though it's different, there's a process that can be the same to turn down those alarm bells, heal, right? The emotional roots, because everyone has something usually that's unprocessed and survival patterns attached to it, that we get to move through, release, integrate a new possibility, harness the brain's incredible creative powers, both in what we're thinking and believing, but what we're also creating, and step by step with some real tangible practices that neuroscience has shown change the neural networks of the brain. All of these work together to truly rewire the nervous system. And visualizing is one of the aspects. But I'll tell you, some of my clients, they can't even visualize. Their brain is so much an alarm. They go to try to create possibility and their brain won't let them.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think some people, when that's what they hear is only like, hey, the story of creating change, they're like, I can't even do it. I try. But as soon as I sit down and try to create good and something possible, it's a fight and my brain overrides it with.
And it could be that they're in pain also. That's too
right.
present.
Yeah. Or they've had probably a really hard life, right? Where they grew up in a very challenging home or abuse, or they had unbelievable trauma to where the brain goes, hey, I need to protect you. We can't expect good things. We got to be prepared so you don't put your guard down. And when that happens, the brain is a really powerful force to not allow creation of something good because it doesn't feel safe to do that. And that's where I realized, okay, it's a tool. But what's the process before that for someone who's had enough life experiences, not just one, but enough to where the system goes, hey, I'm flipping the switch into internal alarm bells are on all of the time. What are the steps to proceed? Because honestly, visualizing, emotionalizing is not until halfway through my process.
The manual override.
Yes.
It's so you created a system, and that took several years of, but at some point you knew that you were going to do that.
Right, even at the beginning, as I studied it and I started to connect pieces and dots. And truthfully, I mean, I've lectured at conferences and medical conferences, and I've been asked, like, how did you connect some of the dots? And the truth is, as I studied the neuroscience, I could connect it with things I'd experienced. But now I was able to put real science to, right? Like, because it's so hard to know, to put those pieces together if you haven't lived fully what it feels like for your nervous system to go, I'm doing this. I don't care what you say or what you do, because of everything you've gone through, I'm going to stay in these survival mechanisms. And like, literally, I had that conversation with my brain. I remember telling my husband, I feel a little crazy because I'm like trying to tell my brain through the second journey, like, no, we can heal. And it literally would fire back like, Ashleigh, remember when you almost died and then you got better, but you still went through this, you still had this surgery, you still had that surgery to remove a breast tumor. Like, I mean, I had so many things. It's just that relative to dying, it was like, we can do this. So my brain had such a powerful data bank to justify never going back into essentially like trusting, right? That I didn't have to always be ready for the next challenge. And that's when I realized, man, there has to be a process to start to shift these networks, because the default mode had been so activated to stay there that it was like an inner battle, no matter what I did, no matter what somatic treatments, no matter what therapy. And that's where I knew this has to come from the inside out so that it stays. So that I really, notwithstanding what might come in the future, because I'm a human, right? Something horrible might happen to someone I love. Like, life is life, but how do I really change that? That notwithstanding the realities of life, my system doesn't default back into alarm, 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 alarm.
And you're teaching others and maintaining this line for yourself, how not to default back into an autopilot that ultimately doesn't serve you, even though the body thinks that it's supposed to.
Yes. And you can change it. Like, I every day work with clients that could trigger me into fear based on what I've gone through, right? I sit with them through their fears, through their traumas, through their challenges, through their limiting beliefs, through all of that. And yet it doesn't pull me back, because I've really changed my operating system. I have clients that have the most diverse of like health challenges that if you listen to even all day, like, you could make someone who's totally healthy start to monitor their body and be like, oh, what does that mean, right? Because we know how powerful the placebo effect is, but the nocebo effect is just as powerful. Like, if you hear something enough, right, and you're like, oh my gosh, my gut is hurting, like, oh, could that be right? It's powerful. But because I really fundamentally healed that, and there's stresses in life all the time, right? And I've had injuries.
Even.
Yes,
it's not all grand.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have people you love who go through horrible things. The world is going through hard things. And my system, though, can take it for what it is today and process it, not default back to overprotection, hypersensitivity, survival. Like, I can come in it and I can come out of it, right? Like, fight or flight gets a bad rap because of the way we talk about it. It's so bad. Well, no, it's life-saving. The fight or flight mechanisms are incredible. I mean, even right now, I'm accessing some of that to speak passionately, right? Any athlete, anything we do, when you perform, musician, you're accessing part of those mechanisms to be on and activated. So they're beautiful. The problem is that when they don't turn off and we live there. So like I tell my clients, we're rewiring while also teaching your nervous system to be flexible. So come what may, come what activates you, you know, a big fight with your spouse or an illness. Like if you get sick, like, cause I've gotten sick, you know, really bad virus or even COVID, but I didn't go to fear, right? Because I knew I could handle it today.
And because you knew that ultimately wasn't going to be healthy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it takes someone educating to help
Yes.
somebody understand. And people contend with so many different illnesses. The body is so wild.
Yes.
And the myriad things that can come up and be just, how is this happening? Or where's this coming from? But it takes somebody like yourself who has had to ask those questions and come up with answers to persevere. Can you share with us some of the nitty-gritty about what's entailed in the program and some of the methodologies by which you help people to find that place of cerebral empowerment?
Yeah. So the first step is there just has to be a paradigm shift of either people who have physical challenges. We've been brought up to believe that the only way to fix them is by treating the body, right? So physical means has to be something in the body. That's the only way to get well.
Purely
right?
structural, yeah.
Viral, bacterial, like, oh, I've got gut issues. It has to be the microbiome. And I'm not discounting that. That is very real. And yet I've had clients that did every protocol, detox, perfect diet, still have gut issues, right? Because one client, it's connected to her mother who committed suicide, right? And the unresolved anger and abandonment she felt as a teenager. Now she thought she had worked through that. She had consciously, but her body had stored the unbelievable emotions that as a teenage girl she couldn't process, right? So for a lot of people, there has to be a paradigm shift of just because it's physical doesn't mean it's purely physical. Doesn't mean it's not being amplified and exasperated by also emotional, right? Because the body combines it all. The brain takes everything into account, your past, your present, your history, your personality, your hurts, your stress levels, to create symptoms. But so there has to be a paradigm shift. Otherwise, nothing else matters. And then people who have more mental, emotional, or have had traumatic events, there has to be a paradigm shift that you're not forever altered. Because there is that feeling, right? Like, yeah. I've never been the same.
Changed.
That's right. I'm irreversibly changed. Yeah, your brain has been altered, but it's plastic. Mm-hmm. So before we do anything else, I really walk my clients through and show them the neuroscience, right? Not just this sounds good, but here's the proof, right? Because that helps us to start to believe when it's hard to believe that you're not broken. And we have to treat the brain and the body, and we have to treat you as the person, right? That then starts to make them open up to a possibility of actually changing, because most of my clients have done a lot by the time they get to me. So they also have all these built up walls of protection, because the hardest thing is trying and not getting better, right? Because you get your hopes up and then they fall. And then you start to, it's really hard to hold on to that belief, right? So we first have to go through this paradigm shift so that you're even open and receptive to all the steps that follow actually matter.
Can you tell sometimes on an initial visit or intake that somebody might not even be at that point yet?
Yes. That's why before I take on a client, I do a consultation.
Yeah.
And we have a conversation. And if they're not ready at that place, then I don't take them on as a client, even if they want to, because they're not open, and that means they won't do the work, right? Because this type of work you have to do for consistently, you'll see some like little shifts, but it's not immediate, like taking a pill or a surgery or something where you're like, ooh, cause and effect. It's like, man, I'm doing this work and I'm doing this brain retraining and neuroplasticity practices and like still me, because there's all this effort that is happening and neural pathways being disrupted and created, and there before you start to see the evidence of it. And I think it's extra hard today because our life has given us immediate results, right? With ordering food, with Amazon, with our phones. And so our brain has been programmed more than ever before for immediate gratification. And so this type of work is a journey of believing and trusting these are all going to work together for change, because I have to continue them before I see the outcome. Mm-hmm. So it has to be at the right time and the person ready and willing, or I can't help them, right? Because I'll show them what to do, but it is dependent on them to do it. And while that feels overwhelming, it's also very empowering at the same time to be like, I have felt powerless for so long. Like now I get to actually do something that I can do to change myself.
Yeah.
But if they're not there, or they're still too stuck in a victim mindset of this happened to me and I can't do anything about it, or blaming too much, then it's really hard. It's hard to take that personal stewardship of, yeah, some of these things that happened are not my fault. They happened to me, right? My upbringing or failed surgery or this breakup or my parents or whatever it is. Yes. And now I am the only one who can change the impact of it.
If they're able to sign on, then you move into like a regular teaching instruction for
So each
practices.
week is new modules and the neuroscience of what we're doing and why, and then the practices. So when they have that first paradigm shift, one of the first things that I do, because most people feel broken or damaged, like one practice that is so powerful is I tell them all to write down a list of everything significant they've gone through in their life. And that feels kind of overwhelming, but the truth is most people do not have compassion for themselves. And I know that sounds good, like we talk about self-love, self-compassion, but from a brain perspective, when you, in the absence of that, when we feel broken, we shame ourselves for being stuck or not being able to heal, we guilt ourselves, that actually locks up the neural synapses in the brain. We've done brain imaging that shows this, that type of harsh self-criticism. Like, it's not just like self-love, it's literally those neural synapses lock up. That's where information is exchanged. So now we're actually in a place where the brain cannot change. It defaults to the survival mechanism. So every other practice to come has to start with clients starting to actually view themselves through self-compassion, not brokenness, not enoughness, not guilting, shaming, what's wrong with me. It's let's look at what you've gone through to start to have some compassion of why you might be where you are. And simultaneously, let's start to really pay attention to your repetitive thoughts that you have. Let's like really start to pay attention to that internal dialogue, because most of us don't. We react to what we think, but we don't really take an audit and really pay attention because it's so habitual. The brain thinks the same thoughts, does the same things, and it's actually really uncomfortable to really start to have that self-awareness of, oh my gosh, like, well, maybe no wonder I'm feeling so anxious because look at what I'm thinking.
Where would a person even begin to form that kind of practice on their own unless they've had some kind of like very forward thinking or exploratory relative or peer like introduce that? I mean, it's really I always think about all the things that we are probably missing out on that could aid towards personal mental health and hygiene.
Yeah, absolutely.
And practices like these being introduced, containers like these are setting people up to engage with the regulation of their own experience, their own neurology, right?
Yeah. And the key is to pay attention, not to guilt yourself for having that thought. Okay, that's the caveat, right? Yeah. It's to go, okay, based on what I've gone through, I have compassion for why I have that thought, but also I now understand I can redirect it. I can introduce a new thought. And by doing that, like I have to take stewardship over that, or it's the difference between the brain talking to us, and it's usually out of fear and out of protection and out of our history, and us just going with it versus now starting to talk to the brain, right? And that's where clients are like, this feels so weird to like talk to myself. And I'm like, no, you've been doing it your whole life. We're always having an internal dialogue. It's just that usually the brain's the originator and we go along with what it's introducing versus, yep, I see that. Okay, I have compassion for that, but it doesn't serve me. let me introduce an alternative, right? And one that actually is in alignment with actually what I want versus what I don't want, what I hope versus what I fear, right? So the truth is, it takes, especially at the beginning, a lot of conscious effort. So I tell them, even one of the signs is when you start feeling anxious, or you start feeling overwhelmed, or you want to procrastinate, or you're feeling really down, or your physical symptoms amplify. Like, that's a trigger to then go inside and be like, what was I thinking? What happened before? Like, what's going on, versus just reacting to the stress response. Let me pause and become reflective and connect and get curious. Like, I want to understand you, right? As a person, like, and the people we care about, we sit down and we try to understand why they are the way that they are. But when do we really do that with ourselves? We're like, I don't have time. I know I'm anxious. I know I'm a procrastinator, but do I sit with myself and actually ask, well, what's underneath all this? I know the response, I know the reaction, but do I understand what's beneath that's driving it? Most of us aren't taught to take the time to do that.
And a lot of
right?
people wind up either getting to that through cognitive therapy, talk therapy,
Yes.
or seeing themselves in a way they've never seen themselves before through a psychedelic experience.
Right. And that is one way in which it breaks down those barriers and allows them maybe to the first time see themselves through compassionate eyes. Right?
But this is wonderful to hear of the process that's accessible to anyone with your waking consciousness.
Yeah.
To work towards that direction. So you teach how to ask and
Right.
engage in that dialogue.
Right. The questions to ask, because the brain is so amazing that based on the questions you ask it will answer, right? It's just normally our questions lead to fear and worst case scenario, and the brain answers, right? So yes, and there's different writing prompts and things that can do that. So really from the next step is, as you write down those significant events, as you start to pay attention to your thoughts, I always tell them to, as they look at those events, what are the belief systems you extracted from your life? Because that's the real linchpin that holds our system in stress, is the beliefs, right? So we can go through something really hard, same experience. And maybe I'm someone, because of my upbringing and my support system and, the beliefs that I have, I extract that I am built to overcome. Someone else goes through the same thing and they're like, I am weak and broken. Or somebody hurts me and I have the belief that that's them. Someone else extracts, I'm not lovable, right? So it's not just what we go through, it's the belief systems, right? So in part, one of my belief systems was, I used to joke that like God went to sleep in my creation and my wiring didn't like all connect, which is why my body was broken, right? Now I have the belief system, my body is incredibly resilient and it knows how to heal. Different beliefs, right? So, but we're not always aware of what our beliefs are underneath the stress responses, but they're adaptive based on what we go through. And some of that formed when we were young, when we didn't have our prefrontal cortex to not just have an emotional response and create an emotional belief. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So then from there, I have a writing protocol that I put together based on 200 neuroscience studies to help process out one by one, like we select one of the events and the belief systems to start processing out all the unresolved thoughts, emotions connected to that, because the body does hold that and we know that, right? And a lot of times when we're in hard things, we can't process it at the same time because we're like surviving, right? And so our body goes, oh, I'm going to hold on to that, right? So for me, I was such a fighter. I had a lot of unresolved fear that I like didn't leave space for. I had a lot of unresolved sadness because it was like, I don't have time for that. I got to fight. I had a lot of unresolved anger, frankly, because it was like, well, I'm not an angry person, so I'm not going to allow that emotion to be felt. But I mean, geez, like I'm not a robot. So I had to just like really sit in that truth of it's not either or. It's not either you're a fighter and you're positive and you're optimistic, or you're defeatist, you're overwhelmed, you're weak. It's like, no, you're a human. And if you go through something, you're going to experience all aspects of the human emotions. But if we don't allow space to move through them, then they get stored, right? And so a lot of that then is part of what holds the nervous system in stress, because the brain takes a snapshot of things that are very hard and embosses it neurologically, but the amplifier of that is the emotional impact of that experience, right? And whatever we don't feel will be held on to by the body, right? And we're so adaptive that we can, but it comes with a cost, right? So I knew I was really healing when I allowed myself, without guilt, without shame, to feel my anger and not judge it, but express it. Not at anyone, but just this full allowance of, man, you've been through so much hard. Like, you have every right to feel this way. Not get stuck in it, not live in it, not project it on other people, but just allow it. And that took a long time for me, because it was like I had to also accept that I could have anger without, quote, attaching my identity to it, right? So really embracing the and versus the either or. So once we start to process things out, now the brain is receptive more to change, because you're removing some of those anchors that hold it, right? And so then once we do that, now we can go into some more practices that now the brain will allow, right? Versus fight. And that's where the order is just as crucial as the steps themselves, right?
Yeah.
Now clients can even get to a place where they can visualize something, because they've processed out so much of the unresolved trauma and emotions that their brain and those fear and defense networks are more open, right? Whereas before they're like closed. They're not receptive. That doesn't feel safe. And so now we can start to harness the brain's capacity, yes, through visualization, through other practices that start to create trust and safety again. Because when you've gone through something hard, you lose trust. If you lose trust in yourself, right? Like, why am I always anxious? Why do I have panic attacks? Why am I depressed? I don't trust myself. Like, what if I go and I have a panic attack, right? You lose trust in your ability. If it's your body, you don't trust your body, right? So, and in the erosion of trust is constant fight or flight signals, right? If you don't trust yourself or your body, then you're in constant hypervigilance, let alone now as the brain does one thing, it does everything, and you start not trusting the world, right? You start trusting not other people, because if you're not safe within yourself, then how is anything safe? It can be temporarily, but there's a constant undertow of, I got to keep my guard up, right? So then we go through practices that start to create more trust and safety and open the pro-social networks in the brain, which is healing, which is repair, which is, now I can actually accept a new wiring, right? And as we can more intentionally start communicating more possibilities. Oh, this is the what if amazing things happen. I can actually create this. And then, like I tell my clients, if you're creating something, the other missing pieces, then you got to start acting in alignment with that every day, even if it's one micro application, because the nervous system isn't just what I sit down and do, it's what I do as I live my life, as I move throughout my day. So even if you are the most incredible visualizer, if the rest of the day you're living more in alignment with the fear and what you don't want, then that's going to be more powerful, right? So let's create, yes, but then let's make a plan, micro application every day, where then, do you know what that does? It starts to build evidence to your brain. Because the hard thing about change is that the past has evidence, right?
Yeah.
So, and the brain is an evidence-based machine. So if you don't start, and this is the implementation, this is the practices, this is the intentional taking action, because as you start to build evidence of that possibility, then the brain starts to get on board.
Yeah.
And all of this works together to where people wake up and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't have a panic attack. Or clients will message me and they're like, I just realized I had such an incredible experience that would have been so triggering in the past, and I was okay. Or, oh my gosh, I had a physical symptom that I was able to calm down myself, right? And this just starts to then build this momentum of possibility, and people start to no longer feel just broken and damaged, but powerful. And that I actually, notwithstanding what I've gone through, I can change and I can heal and I can have a different future and I can shift my identity and I can shift my belief systems, and I really can operate differently. And it brings tears to my eyes when people really start to feel that and embrace that.
It's so powerful.
It's
so gratifying.
Powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's a joy in you about it, and it would necessitate that. This kind of work would necessitate it, as you're very, very candidly embracing so much turmoil from other people and being able to sit with that and see it and stay focused. And it's very, very powerful healing work. It's medicine work that you're doing. Yeah. And your bandwidth for your practice, how many people are you able to work with at one time? I guess at a certain point, when you go through it enough, you can stay focused on the mechanics, and you're able to work through a solid foundation, a solid process. But how many clients are you able to kind of take on and go through this together?
Yeah, and they start. I do it. I have clients that work one-on-one as they move through the process. Then I have clients that do it through a small group as they move through the process. So in different cohorts that start at different times. My bandwidth has definitely expanded, and I've trained someone else to help support my clients now, which is awesome. I trained her for a whole year. She was actually a prior client who was bedridden and now doing amazing.
Awesome.
So that's expanded my bandwidth, but I definitely have found there's a limit, because the most important thing to me, and honestly from a business side, I've had business coaches tell me I'm nuts with the way that I operate, but my most important goal always is every person is so valuable, and I want them to get well and not have a lot of people get little results. Because if one person really changes, that shift on their family, their community is so significant. So ultimately, it's expanded to where now I have support, and the ultimate goal is to continue to train people so that continues to grow. It's just, it has to be, they have to know the neuroscience. So it takes a little time, right?
Sure.
And it's people's lives, but that's the next vision is I want bioemotional healing to be a household name. I don't want it to die with me, and I'm working on a book so that also there's accessible to people who, can't come in. So the goal is that this just keeps growing and growing and growing and gets more and more accessible and goes way beyond my capacity, because I know with the right steps and process, like, people can heal. And it doesn't have to now the rest of my life is trying to heal. Like, we really can shift so that we can live, like I tell my clients, we're not just going from surviving to healing. We're going from surviving to living more and more as we heal, right? Because it's not always easy, and it is heavy sometimes, and it takes a lot of courage to do this type of work. But my goal is that it expands people's capacity to have joy and to have connection and to be present and to get back to their passions and their talents, and not just on the other side of healing, because we're always healing in one way or the other because we keep living life. We keep having interactions. We keep going through hard things, but to really change their operating system so that it's flexible and able to navigate the ups and downs, but that they continue to live and be present and continue to come in and out as they need to, right? Because we're all going to get activated sometimes. We're all going to have fear sometimes, but to really teach their nervous system how to have that flexibility and to have those tools, because that's where you really feel resilient in life. Like, me and my system, we're a team, and it doesn't mean we're not going to have hard days, hard moments, but I know we can come out of it versus I'm afraid I'll get stuck back in it again. And it's so empowering to see. And then I've seen, I help a spouse and they help their spouse, and now they're teaching their children. There's just this beautiful effect as it spreads. And what a beautiful thing. Like I tell my clients, they're always like, oh, I feel like I've damaged my kids, with everything we've gone through. And I said, no, like what a beautiful experience for you to change and to show them that that's possible, and I went through that myself. My daughter, she was 2 when I went through all that hell, and she watched me go through so much. But the flip side of that is she's such an incredible little 12-year-old because of what this work has taught me that has totally changed how I would parent. So every day I'm so grateful for where I am. I'm so grateful for where my clients are. And I'm so grateful for how I interact in the world now in a way that is different and better than if I hadn't gone through the hell to learn this.
I want to put one scenario out there before we close. Yeah. Early on in the discussion today, we talked about how we acknowledge that some people are not able to go through a psychedelic medicine experience for whatever reason, whether it's medication they're on previously or underlying mental health condition that's been identified and ruled them out of certain opportunities for their safety. Have you engaged with someone who has either been diagnosed with a condition such as bipolar 1 or 2, or someone who is in active opioid addiction?
I have.
And they've been able to acknowledge what's necessary to go through the bioemotional healing program, and they've been able to get invested and do the work. And because I know that I would imagine there might be somebody who is watching or listening who is looking for a modality that they can find safety and make progress in, and psychedelics might not be right for them. And this feels very psychedelic to me, the whole vision for the process and the whole action that's entailed. So you've been able to work with people who have diagnoses and are potentially in active addiction. It's worked.
As long as the only necessity is the desire to do things to get well, right? Like, okay, I understand this is going to be an active process, and I want it, and I'm willing to do it. That's literally all that's required. And I've had people very depressed, but they have a sliver of, okay, I want to do this piece by piece. And that's why this process works, because it's progressive, right? It builds on itself. So we start, because my clients are so stuck in those survival mechanisms by the time they come, or, whether, again, that's depression or anxiety or pain, but we build on itself. So the only thing that's required is the desire and the willingness to piece by piece push through the resistance and do the steps. But they're not doing it alone, and they're doing it in a proven process, and they have the support throughout. And I think one of the biggest things that I've heard in that feedback is that in understanding all the science, but also just all the way in which I present the information, is for the first time in their life, they don't feel totally broken. And when someone can start to just feel that, you access this whole new hope and reserves that allow you to move forward in a way, that wasn't accessible prior.
But a little bit of information shared skillfully can have such a difference. So active opioid addiction, you've worked with people.
I have.
Yeah. I've had the experience in my lifetime of being close to someone who was in active opioid addiction, and the crushing, relentlessly, the trap of that, the power that had over her. She could acknowledge the situation and was seemingly helpless too. And that's why I always thought, if there would have been an opportunity for her to have had an intervention such as a psychedelic intervention that can be so life-changingly, dramatically, powerfully paradigm-shifting, even just a glimpse of what could be possible
Right.
for her to see herself differently or to envision a different possibility.
Right.
That kind of insight, right? Whether it's shared through a medicine, a spirit, or a teacher such as yourself. So that's one thing I wanted to clarify
Yeah.
from you. So you've been able to move into that space and work.
And I get it too, because of having been in pain,
Yeah.
right? And I have total empathy for why people get there through pain or just the emotional pain, right? And it's not easy, for sure. It's a powerful force, but if they have to be accepting, right? Because I have people who, like, families will reach out to me, but their child or their sibling, they still won't accept the full reality that they are, right? At that point, they're not ready. But if they are, then absolutely. And it's definitely not easy, but it absolutely is possible. And I've seen it too. I also have close family members, and a lot of people don't make it, but like, I fully believe with a willingness and a sliver of hope, like, no one is too far gone. Like, no one. It probably, I have spoken on huge stages. I've spoken on medical conferences, and my favorite place I've ever spoken was at this treatment center for prisoners that were reforming their life. And we're talking about hard criminals, all degree of addictions too. And it was my favorite place I have ever spoken because of this hope and this willingness to accept that they could just change their life, that they weren't too far gone. They didn't have to be labeled a criminal or whatever the rest of their life, that they truly could heal all the aspects, that led them to that path and reinvent themselves, and the feeling of just hope in that room was so profound. I think I don't know if I've ever cried so much because I could just feel people who'd been totally broken and even set aside, and what it took to really give yourself that chance. And we all are there to some degree or another, and like I said, if there's a willingness and you're just open to even receiving it, then no one is too far gone.
You might have just answered this question, but I've been asking my guests what's really bending their minds right now. What's really bending your mind at this time?
I think in a world that seems so divisive all the time, what I'm so grateful to be in a work where I see people from all different cultures, religions, backgrounds, faiths, traumas, challenges, and to know that the brain is the same for each of us. Like, the functionalities of it, and to see these people, notwithstanding how different they are, follow the same journey to healing. And that just makes the brain is my love language. Because as much as we think it's the enemy, there's so much commonality in our mechanisms that the way forward to healing, as different as we are, it's really the same at the same time, right? There's these things that we have to heal that have broken us, have damaged us, have altered us. We all need more love. We all need more compassion and grace and connection. And we all are equally powerful in what we can harness within ourselves. And that allows me to see all humans through that powerful lens of potential versus how different we are. And I think we all need that more than ever today. And I'm grateful that, as rewarding as my work is, it also gives me that lens each day.
Bio-emotional healing, ACT, awareness of the hardwired thoughts and emotions stored in the body. Connect to the body with breath and questions to interrupt preconditioned responses. Take control of thoughts and emotions to create a new neurochemical response. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today to talk about bio-emotional healing and everything else. Ashleigh Di Lello will have your contact information in the show. Your website is your name?
Yes. And if you search bio-emotional healing, it will come up. My website's ashleighdilello.com. Like I said, there's resources there for you to look at. And if you're tried a lot of things, even done psychedelics and haven't gotten the same change, or you can't, or you've just done so many things and you really want to get the freedom. And that's what I think it is. It's freedom, right? It's freedom from our past, our mind, our body, our challenges. Then reach out, schedule a consultation. I promise you, I've had 83-year-old clients and 15-year-old clients, and it's possible. And believe me, that 83-year-old's neural wiring was very well established. And even she could change.
Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you.